The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in soft strokes of pink and gold. Eli Grayson stood at the boundary of his fields, the earth beneath his worn boots cracked and barren. It was a silence unlike any he had known in Munster, silence heavy with absence. The cursed soil that once demanded blood and sacrifice lay fallow now, stripped of its dark hunger by the terrible storm and the desperate ritual that had cost so much. He drew in a long breath, the cool air filling his lungs and carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and distant pine. The land seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Eli's tired eyes scanned the desolate fields, each cracked furrow a reminder of what had been lost and what might still be saved. He felt Mara's presence behind him before she spoke. "It's quiet," she said softly, stepping beside him. Her voice was steady, but Eli could detect the weariness beneath her words. "Too quiet." He nodded, his gaze lingering on the horizon where the first wisps of morning mist curled like ghostly fingers. "It feels like the land's holding back something, like it's watching us, waiting to see if we'll break." Mara reached out, her hand finding his rough one. "We survived the worst. We can rebuild. We'll plant new seeds, nurture the soil without giving it the darkness it craves. We have to believe that." Eli wanted to share her hope, to let it fill the hollow places within him. But the memories of the storm, the voices, the visions, the price they'd paid, clung to him like shadows. The fields were empty now, but the land's hunger was a beast that did not easily forget. Inside the house, Mara moved with purpose, her hands busy kneading dough in the kitchen as the sun rose higher. The smell of yeast and flour was a small comfort, a reminder of ordinary life amid extraordinary horrors. She spoke quietly to Eli as he entered. "We'll take it day by day. The crops may be slow to grow, but the earth remembers how to heal." Eli watched her, the steady rhythm of her movements a balm to his restless mind. "You always find a way to keep us grounded," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Someone has to," Mara replied, her eyes meeting his with a fierce kindness. "We're still here. That counts for something." Yet, even as hope flickered between them, the farm bore marks of the past that refused to fade. One afternoon, a sudden gust of cold wind swept through the empty barn, stirring loose straw and sending a faint whisper echoing in Eli's ears. He paused, a chill crawling up his spine, heart tightening with old fears he thought had been laid to rest. The shadows seemed to dance just beyond the edges of his vision, a subtle reminder that the cursed earth still held secrets in its depths. The days stretched on, slow and tentative. Eli and Mara worked side by side, clearing debris, patching fences, and tending the soil with cautious hands. At twilight, they often sat together on the porch, watching the sky darken as clouds gathered faintly on the horizon. The silence between them was filled with unspoken questions about the future, about the land, about what price peace might demand next. "Do you think it's really over?" Mara asked one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli looked out at the darkening fields, the wind carrying the scent of rain and earth. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we have to believe it is, for Sarah's sake, for ours." The fragile peace they clung to was a delicate balance hope, tempered by the memories of blood and sacrifice, love shadowed by loss and lingering dread. As the night deepened, Eli felt the weight of the land's dark legacy pressing against the edges of his mind. The cursed earth was silent for now, but he knew better than to trust that silence completely. Somewhere beneath the cracked soil, the roots of the past still twisted and writhed, waiting for the time when hunger would rise again. And Eli Grayson, stubborn and determined, would be ready or so he vowed to himself as the stars blinked coldly overhead. The horizon was a fragile line between what had been and what might come. And in that twilight, Eli and Mara faced the future together, wounded, weary, but unbroken. The harvest of ashes was done, but the story of Black Hollow was far from over. The morning air was crisp, a thin mist curling over the Black Hollow fields like a shroud reluctant to lift. Eli Grayson stood alone at the edge of the fallow land, his breath shallow as he stared down at the cracked earth beneath his worn boots. The cursed soil, once a ravenous beast demanding blood and sacrifice, now lay quiet and barren, a silent tomb of what had been and what might never be again. In his palm, he held a single seed, a small kernel of corn, bright and hopeful against the roughness of his skin. For weeks, the land had remained dormant, the storm's fury having stripped away the last remnants of the farm's cursed vitality. The crops had withered, the roots rotted away, and with them, the unholy pact that had fed the soil with the blood of his ancestors seemed broken at, least for now. Yet Eli's heart throbbed with uncertainty. Could life grow again here without the price the land had always demanded? Could the soil be nourished by hope instead of sacrifice? Eli knelt slowly, the cold earth pressing against his palms as he reached the spot where he would plant the seed. The sun was just beginning to rise, spilling pale light across the horizon and casting long shadows over the empty fields. The wind whispered through the skeletal remains of last season's stalks, carrying faint echoes of voices Eli had come to dread, the murmurs of the cursed earth, half-remembered cries of those lost to its hunger. Eli Mara's voice was soft, tentative, breaking the heavy silence. She approached from behind, her footsteps muffled by the damp soil. Her sharp eyes, always so steady, now held a flicker of worry and cautious hope. She stopped beside him, placing a warm hand on his shoulder. "I don't know if this will work," Eli admitted, his voice rough with years of weariness. "If the land will even let this seed take root, or if it'll demand more." Mara squeezed his shoulder, offering silent support. "We have to try. For Sarah, for us, for the farm." Together, they knelt side by side. Eli pressed the seed gently into the soil, the earth cold and unyielding beneath his fingers. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then a subtle tremor ran through the ground, like a pulse awakening from a long slumber. A faint warmth radiated upward, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a shiver through Eli's spine. He withdrew his hand slowly, watching the soil settle around the seed. The field remained still, the mist swirling in lazy eddies. The sun rose higher, bathing the land in a soft light that seemed almost dreamlike watercolor tones, blending the edges of earth and sky. "Do you feel that?" Mara whispered, eyes fixed on the spot where the seed had been buried. Eli nodded, a fragile hope stirring in his chest. Maybe this is a new beginning. But beneath that hope lay an undercurrent of dread. The curse had been cruel and patient, woven into the very roots of the land and bloodlines. Breaking free from it would not come without cost. Eli's mind raced through the possibilities, the hunger of the soil, the spirits bound to the earth, the whispers that haunted his nights. Would they return? Would the land demand another sacrifice, more terrible than before? As the day wore on, Eli and Mara moved about the farm, tending to what little remained. Their actions were careful, deliberate, each step a prayer against the shadows that clung to the edges of their vision. The farm was silent, the usual creaks and groans of a working homestead replaced by an uneasy stillness. That evening, they sat on the porch, the sky above painted in soft hues of pink and purple, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading light. Mara leaned against Eli, her presence a steady anchor in the swirling sea of his thoughts. "We've survived worse," she said quietly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Eli looked out over the fields, the first star twinkling faintly in the twilight. The cursed earth was watching, waiting. But tonight, it was silent. And for the first time in a long time, Eli allowed himself to believe that the harvest might one day be of life, not ashes. Yet, as darkness folded over Black Hollow, a faint wind stirred among the withered stalks, carrying a whisper too low to hear, but heavy with promise and warning. The land's hunger had not vanished. It was patient, and it was hungry still. Eli's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The new seed was planted. The question now was whether it would take root, or whether the shadows of the past would rise to claim it and them once more. The balance hung fragile, poised between hope and despair, life and death, the promise of renewal and the threat of ruin. And Eli Grayson, weathered and worn but unbroken, stood ready to meet whatever came next. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the faint crackle of the fire in the stove. Mara stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, the warmth seeping into her palms. Outside, the night pressed close, thick and still, but inside the farmhouse, the air felt heavier with unspoken words. Eli sat at the table, his eyes fixed on the faded wood, fingers tracing invisible patterns as if seeking answers in the grain. "Eli," Mara's voice was low but steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. He looked up, meeting her gaze, those sharp, unwavering eyes that had seen him through storms far worse than this. "We can't keep living like this, caught between fear and the past. The farm, the cursed earth. It's not all we are." Eli swallowed hard, the weight of years pressing down on his tired shoulders. "You think it's that easy? After everything we've lost? After what the land's taken?" She stepped closer, setting the mug down with a gentle clink. "No, it's not easy, but it's necessary. You're not alone, Eli. We're in this together, and I won't let you drown in despair." For a long moment, he said nothing, the battle raging silently within him. Then, slowly, he nodded, a flicker of something fragile stirring in his chest hope. The next morning dawned cold and grey, the fields outside still barren but no longer quite as foreboding. Mara insisted they take a walk, a break from the suffocating walls of the farmhouse. They moved side by side, boots crunching over the dry earth, the wind carrying the faint scent of ash and damp soil. The skeletal remains of last season's crops swayed weakly, shadows stretching across the ground like ghosts of the past. "I know it's hard," Mara said softly, her gaze fixed ahead, "but we have to believe there can be life here again. Not because the land demands it, but because we choose it." Eli glanced at her, the determination in her voice igniting a spark within him he thought had long since died. The silence between them was no longer oppressive, but filled with tentative understanding. Back inside, Mara pulled an old photograph from the mantelpiece, its edges worn and corners curled. She handed it to Eli, who studied the sepia-toned faces staring back at him, ancestors whose eyes held stories of sacrifice, pain, and resilience. "They survived," Mara murmured, "through storms, famine, and hardship. We owe it to the land, to Seritu, keep going." Eli's fingers tightened around the photo. "I'm scared, Mara, scared of what the land might still want from us." She reached out, her hand covering his. "Then let's face that fear together. No more secrets. No more sacrifices we don't choose." That night, Mara sat by the window, the moonlight washing over her like a silver veil. The stars blinked through the creeping fog, distant and cold, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. She whispered a prayer not for miracles, but for courage and strength to meet whatever came next. Eli watched her from across the room, the silhouette of her unwavering spirit anchoring the storm inside him. For the first time in months, the oppressive hunger of the cursed earth seemed less like an inevitable doom and more like a challenge they might just overcome. But the night held its own secrets, and as the wind whispered through the broken fields, the question lingered in the air: could hope truly take root in soil soaked with ashes? Eli's fingers brushed Mara's as she closed her eyes, the fragile bond between them a lifeline against the dark. Together, they would face the shadows, heal the fractures, and search for a future beyond the curse, a future born not of blood and sacrifice, but of love and resolve. Outside, a crow cawed once, sharp and clear, breaking the silence. Mara opened her eyes, a faint smile touching her lips. "We'll find a way," she said softly. And for the first time in a long time, Eli believed her. The farm lay silent, a vast expanse of fallow earth stretching beneath a sky tinged with the first pale fingers of dawn. Eli Grayson stood at the threshold where the cracked soil met the worn wooden porch of the farmhouse, the chill of early morning seeping through his threadbare flannel shirt. He inhaled deeply, the sharp tang of dew and earth mingling with the faint, unsettling scent of decay that still lingered like a ghost. The land was quiet now, but the silence was heavy, pregnant with the memories of what had been lost and the uneasy calm that followed the violent storm. He let his gaze wander across the barren fields, the skeletal remains of what had once been crops, now brittle and lifeless under the soft light. Not a single sprout dared to rise from the cursed soil, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Yet Eli knew better than to trust the stillness. The land had been hungry once, insatiable in its demands, and though the storm had broken the bond that fed it, the earth's dark memory remained etched deep beneath the surface. Mara's voice broke the quiet, gentle but edged with concern. "You shouldn't stand out here so long, Eli. It's cold, and you're wearing thin." She stepped out onto the porch, her sharp eyes scanning his weathered face, searching for the man she once knew beneath the layers of exhaustion and vigilance. He turned to her, managing a faint, tired smile. "It's just hard to let go of watching. After all we've been through, I can't help but feel like the land's still watching back, waiting." She joined him, her hand slipping into his calloused one, the warmth a brief comfort against the chill. "We've survived. The worst is behind us. Maybe now it's time to try and live again." Eli nodded slowly, but doubt gnawed at him. The farm was a scar on the earth, a reminder of the sacrifices made and the horrors endured. The cursed soil might lie dormant, but its shadows stretched long and deep, a silent sentinel that would never truly rest. Inside the farmhouse, the morning light filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating the modest kitchen where Mara prepared their breakfast. The clink of plates and the soft murmur of their voices filled the space, a fragile bubble of normalcy amid the lingering tension. "Do you think the land will ever forgive us?" Mara asked quietly as she set a steaming cup of coffee before him. Eli stirred his cup, eyes fixed on the swirling dark liquid. "I don't know if it's about forgiveness anymore. It's about respect and vigilance. We broke the curse, yes, but that soil remembers. We have to keep watch, keep the balance." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden gust of wind that rattled the window panes, carrying with it the dry rustle of dead leaves and the faintest whisper, like a voice lost on the breeze. Eli's gaze snapped to the shadows beyond the glass, his grip tightening on the cup. As dusk approached, Eli found himself once again pacing the perimeter of the farm, his boots crunching on the gravel path worn by years of toil. The wind had picked up, stirring the brittle stalks of last season's crops that stood like silent sentinels against the darkening sky. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something older, something that whispered promises and threats in the rustling leaves. He paused, eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon where the fields met the forest's edge. The shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, playing tricks on his mind, but he knew better. The cursed earth still breathed beneath his feet, alive in memory and menace. A sudden, distant howl shattered the quiet night, sharp and raw, echoing across the hollow. Eli's heart clenched, his hand closing around the worn wooden staff. He carried a talisman as much for himself as for protection. He stood rigid, breath visible in the cold air, muscles tensed for whatever might come next. The howl faded, swallowed by the night, leaving only the sound of the wind whispering through the silent fields. Eli exhaled slowly, a bitter smile touching his lips. The storm had passed, the curse broken, but the price of survival was eternal vigilance. The land demanded it, and he would not let the darkness return. As he turned back toward the farmhouse, the weight of the past pressed upon him, but beneath it, a fragile thread of hope glimmered. The silent fields might never be truly at peace, but perhaps, with watchful eyes and steady hands, the Grayson legacy could endure not as a prisoner of the cursed earth, but as its wary guardian. And somewhere deep in the shadows, the land waited, patient and hungry, for the next chapter to unfold. The sky hung heavy with a bruised purple haze as dawn struggled to break over the ruined fields of Black Hollow. Eli Grayson stood at the edge of the battered earth, his boots sinking slightly into the ash-strewn soil that once promised life but had only yielded death. The remnants of the storm still whispered through the shattered trees, a soft susurrus carrying the weight of the night's fury. He breathed in the cold, damp air, tasting the metallic temps of rain mixed with smoke. The land was silent now, a quiet so profound it pressed against his ears. Only the distant call of a lone crow echoed through the hollow, a mournful sound that seemed to mourn alongside him. Eli's eyes traced the blackened furrows where crops had once thrived in natural vitality born of unnatural sacrifice. The cursed earth, once a source of stubborn hope, had demanded a toll he could no longer pay. His hands, calloused and worn, clenched at his sides, trembling not from cold but from the weight of what had been lost. Behind him, the farmhouse stood battered but still standing, its windows like tired eyes watching over the land. Mara's voice called softly from inside her, fragile thread pulling him back from the abyss. He turned, his tired eyes meeting hers through the cracked doorway. She stepped forward, her strong features softened by exhaustion but resolute. "It's over," she said, voice steady but laced with the sorrow of unspoken sacrifice. "We're free." Eli nodded, swallowing the lump of grief lodged in his throat, but at what cost? Inside, the fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls scarred by years of struggle. Mara moved to tend their wounds, both physical and unseen, wrapping a blanket around Eli's shoulders. They sat close, the silence between them heavy but necessary, a shared space where neither needed to speak the horrors that had unfolded. His mind drifted back to the moments that had led them here, the twisted roots writhing beneath the soil like dark veins. The blood spilled to feed a hunger older than memory, the faces of ancestors staring back at him through haunting visions. Those ghosts of the past, bound to the cursed earth by a pact of blood and desperation, now seemed almost to weep with him. Kneeling by the hearth, Eli pulled from his coat pocket the battered family journal, its pages soaked with the weight of secrets and sorrow. With hands trembling, he buried it deep into the hearth's ashes, as if to lay to rest the sins of generations. Outside, night descended, a velvet cloak stitched with stars. Eli walked the perimeter of the fields, the cold wind brushing against his skin like a whispered warning. The land lay dormant, silent but watchful, as if holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter to be written. He knew the fragile peace was but a truce, a pause in a story older than himself. The cursed earth's hunger might sleep, but it would never truly be sated. Eli paused, eyes fixed on the horizon where the first pale light of dawn began to bleed into the darkness. He clenched his fists, a silent vow echoing in his heart, a promise to guard this fragile balance, to protect the legacy not with blood, but with resilience and memory. The harvest of ashes was complete. What grew next would be born of hope, or nothing at all. And somewhere deep beneath the soil, the shadows waited. The following days were a blur of quiet rebuilding and reckoning. Mara and Eli moved through the wreckage of their lives with a slow, deliberate care, tending to wounds both visible and hidden. The farm lay fallow, the cursed soil now a silent grave of its terrible past. Neighbors avoided the Grayson homestead, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pity. The town's silence was a heavy cloak, but Eli found strength in Mara's steady presence, their bond forged anew in the crucible of loss. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the empty fields, Mara took Eli's hand. "We'll find a way," she whispered, her voice a fragile ember of hope. Together, Eli looked down at their intertwined fingers, the rough texture grounding him. Together, he echoed, the word a lifeline against the darkness. But as night fell and the wind stirred, a faint rustle rose from the earth, a subtle reminder that the land's story was far from over. The cursed soil lay quiet, but never still, and in the distance, beyond the horizon, a new seed awaited its moment to awaken. Eli's journey had ended, but the legacy of Black Hollow remained a testament to the price of survival and the shadows cast by ancestral sins. As he stood once more on the threshold of the fields, the morning light kissed his weathered face, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a tentative breath of hope. The harvest of ashes had scorched the past, but from its ashes, perhaps, something new might yet grow. The land waited, patient and watchful, as the fragile balance between life, death, and dark hunger held fast. And so the story lingered on, whispered in the wind, etched in the soil, carried in the hearts of those who dared to remember.